When Dr. James Naismith invented the game of basketball as a mere athletic distraction for a group of rowdy YMCA students, he never could have imagined that one day his brainchild would evolve into one of the most celebrated facets of our nation's sports culture. More than 100 years have passed since the game was invented, and over that period of time, college basketball has grown into a national spectacle, a superhighway of commercialization, mass marketing, and revenue. Before the pavement of the superhighway begins, a humble dirt road resides. At the end of that road, just west of the Schuylkill River, in the heart of Philadelphia, stands a church-like building with the smell of 8 decades of basketball filling the air. Since its doors opened in 1927, this gymnasium has hosted more college basketball fans at more college basketball games than any other arena in the country. An outdated, musty old relic of an era long gone, this building once housed all that involved a ball and hoop in the city of Philadelphia and served as the stomping ground for the game that captured the heart of America. So step inside, look around, and listen carefully. You just might hear the spirits of basketball's past reveal the extraordinary tale of why the Palestra is lovingly referred to as the Mecca of college basketball, Cathedral of the game.
The original Palestra was built in the 3rd century BC. It was part of the Olympic complex, Olympia. And it was a rectangular space, 66 meters by 66 meters, adjacent to a larger gymnasium.
The athletes in ancient Greece used to train for their specialties in gymnastics and wrestling and other sports. And then they would compete against other teams and the individuals outdoors in a venue called a palestra.
And palestra is Latin. It means a public viewing area for observing athletes. So the name palestra is an old name, and the concept of a palestra, an athletic venue, is an ancient one. So when in 1926 they were planning the palestra in Philadelphia on the campus of the University of Pennsylvania, as a professor who studied Greek studies suggested the name palestra.
When this building was built, basketball was just coming into its own. It had been invented 40 years earlier in a YMCA up in New England, but it hadn't really taken off as a great intercollegiate game. And so Penn took a certain amount of risk in building an arena for a game that was just really getting underway.
And the risk they took is to build a building that is exclusively designed for one sport, basketball. This was in 1927. Even in the 50s and 60s and 70s, we were building multi-purpose stadiums. But this was in 1927. So this was a big risk. This was a novel idea back then.
They did it using the architectural firm of Day and Clowder, in this instance Charles Clowder, who was at this point the great intercollegiate architect. He's working all over. He's writing the book on college architecture in America that really sets the standard for how you'll build every major building type. And I think he knew from talking at other universities that basketball and winter sports were about to become big. And he was able to combine his understanding of the industrial culture of Philadelphia, the capacity to build gigantic steel halls for the great factories of the city, turn that basically into a sporting facility by using the steel truss roofs to span the great single-span space of this auditorium.
Despite initial fears that college basketball would not be popular enough to fill its stands, ground broke on the University of Pennsylvania's new gymnasium in June of 1926. One of the most astounding construction projects of its time, the steelwork for the massive structure was assembled and erected by November of that same year. The bricks were then laid, pointed and polished off before the close of 1926, making the Palestra ready for opening night after a mere 7 months of construction.
The Palestra opened on January 1st, 1927, and Penn beat Yale 26-15 before a standing room crowd of 10,000 fans. That sellout crowd of 10,000 fans was the largest crowd ever to watch a basketball game in the East Coast of the United States. When the Palestra opened, any early fears that it would not be a suitable venue for basketball were quickly dispelled when it attracted not only great teams playing basketball games there, but the fans and the coaches and the players all agreed that it was one of the finest venues in the country to either participate in or to watch college basketball.
The building was understood immediately as a masterpiece. This was a building that everyone saw it, felt what they had achieved, saw the court in the shape of the game, understood that this was the great idea. And really, in a sense, this was a building that became the model as much as any building in the country.
There's no question in my mind that the Palestra and basketball, they're synonymous. When we build stadiums now, we hire consultants that determine the angle of the seats. How many seats come together? How do they come into the corners? You have 3-4 consultants who are trying to generate computer models. Isn't it interesting that the Palestra was probably drafted on paper and somehow they got it right? There's not a bad seat in the place.
As soon as this building opened, it immediately began to change the character of the game at Penn. We began to get better kids. We start to win more games as that becomes sort of part of kids wanting to play here. But this then becomes the place that all of the schools of the city aspire to. I think that's the great thing. When you look at the arenas and the other campuses, none of them got here until much later. But this is the building that the nation began to know was the great place to play basketball.
Right from the outset, the Palestra became a very popular venue, so much so that 12 years after it opened, in 1939, when the NCAA tournament began, they hosted half the tournament. And of course, today we've seen how the NCAA tournament has grown, and the Palestra was there right at the beginning.
This is one of those places that shaped the game in a way like the Boston Garden for pro basketball. This became the quintessential college basketball place. And more than any other place, I think, tells the story of college basketball at its best.
In a way, it's ironic that here you have the Palestra that opened in 1927 amid some apprehension whether it was going to be successful as a college basketball venue, and less than 30 years later it becomes host to the most unique, successful college basketball consortium in history, when you had the Palestra hosting Penn and Temple and LaSalle and St. Joe's and Villanova in what we have come to know as the Big Five.
The Palestra was Penn's home court. That's really all it meant to me, and I think anybody else in the Philadelphia area who was playing college basketball. The big games were played at Convention Hall. And there again were the intercity rivalries, except Penn was not involved, nor was Villanova.
You did have Convention Hall, which is what, block and a half. It was a block and a half from the Palestra, and they were playing their doubleheaders there, and we were playing our doubleheaders at the Palestra, and frequently they were at the same time, and something had to be accomplished within the city to try to bring it all under one roof. And so then Bob Paul and John Rossiter, who was a business manager at Penn, came up with this idea of all the colleges playing their one game at the Palestra.
In 1955, the Big Five athletic directors got together and decided to form the Big Five. And one of the necessities of doing it is that everybody had to play each other, even though not every school liked each other.
I think we've discussed this enough to possibly put this into a motion form. You want to word that?
Yeah, I'll make the motion. I would simply propose that we all must play a minimum number of 10 games a year at the Palestra.
Yeah, and I'll second.
Do we have a second?
Yeah, I'll second. Right.
In those days, there was a little bit of animosity among the 5 schools, scheduling problems and conflicts, and I think a lot of people doubted that it would work. I think I was a doubter because they had so many different goals. The 5 universities were going in 5 different directions. And a lot of us said, well, we'll wait and see how this is going to go.
Any further discussion? We're ready for the vote? Yes. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
We have a minimum of 10 games then.
Minimum of 10 games in the Palestra.
It was unheard of that 5 colleges and universities would agree to play under one roof, agree to play each other in a round-robin competition, and to share the revenues from these games equally. That was unheard of.
These relationships that people thought might hamper putting something together like the Big Five, it was found out that when everybody came around and sat at the table, and the table in a sense was the Palestra where you were going to play all these things and everybody was going to meet, the schools suddenly realized they didn't know why they really weren't playing against each other, and so it eased the way for all the institutions to accept the Big Five as a common ground for relationships with the other schools in the city.
It was a great idea at the time. It was a unique idea. Philadelphia was the only city in the country that had this type of format. I mean, 5 teams playing round-robin games against each other in one location and then playing a number of other, at least 13 of their home games in one location in a doubleheader setting on Wednesday, Friday, and Saturdays.
It gave the city a very unifying aspect of city life, if you will, because basketball was always big in Philadelphia, but now it centralized it, and everybody was rooting for basketball in Philadelphia.
During that first year of 1955-56, I think as the season progressed and basketball followers found that coming to the Palestra was the place to go to see the best in college basketball, best nationally, because there was no other area in the country that had this kind of program. So this noble experiment, I think before that first season had finished, had all the earmarks of being a very, very successful program.
The Philadelphia Big Five did more than just grow into a highly successful program. The city's unique round-robin format exceeded everyone's expectations and became one of the most storied traditions in all of college athletics. For nearly 30 years, LaSalle, Pennsylvania, St. Joseph's, Temple, and Villanova met on the Palestra floor to fight for bragging rights in the city of brotherly love. With many of the Big Five players hailing from local Philadelphia high schools, the City Series matchups spawned the most intense rivalries in college basketball history.
This City Series tradition was something unlike any other city in the country had, and it helped keep a lot of our great high school talent here at home, so they competed against each other not only in high school and on the schoolyards, but in college as well.
There wasn't as much awareness of the NCAA tournament. So there was a lot of pride and there was a lot of discussion each year in Philadelphia about the best team in Philadelphia. And you know what? At that time, that was like being crowned the national champion.
Winning the City Series championship was as important to the coaches than winning the NCAA championship. That's how big it was. That the intensity and the rivalry of playing against your friends and neighbors, you know, what's the best way to bring the best out of you? Compete against somebody that you know. You know, you won't want to be second to your high school teammate or the people, you know, that you competed with through high school.
Two of the top teams in the country playing in a backyard battle, a jam-packed Palestra. Cannon, lead pass, Williams. Oh, Hanlon! Cannon, good, and a foul.
When you would recruit a player and he would come into your program, he would understand you playing some named teams on your schedule outside of the Palestra. But there was no way to train him, there was no way to explain what it meant to play a Big Five game in the Palestra. The emotion, the rivalry, and what you had to live with if you couldn't conclude with a win.
Every game is magnified even more so because of the type of game that's played in the Palestra, because everyone's up and hyped and ready to go up to the ultimate. And you know, we went in there knowing that we were going to war. It was going to be a big, big, big game for both teams.
What you're seeing here is not the finals of the NCAA tournament. It was kind of just another Big Five ball game, Charlie. That's all it ever was.
After it was all said and done, the intensity, the emotion, the enthusiasm that was shown at the Palestra, I can't even remember once coming out of that Palestra and seeing anyone fighting or arguing, and mostly congratulations. I mean, it was good sportsmanship.
I think, you know, Penn, St. Joe, you know, Villanova, when there was a Big Five game, they felt they had part of that, you know, because the Palestra, I think, belonged to all of Philadelphia, really. It was on Penn's campus, but I somehow get the sense that all of Philadelphia felt that they had a part of it. So when Villanova guys played there or St. Joe guys played there, especially if it may have been an opponent outside of Philadelphia, you know, they really felt that was their home floor.
We played here at the Palestra, even though it was our home court. We shared it, and we liked sharing it with the other four teams. We felt it was their gym as much as ours. We would defend it when they would come in, but in that doubleheader when the other team was playing Temple, St. Joe, we would go out and we would root for them just like they'd root for us. So that was the great thing. When there always were doubleheaders, if the non-Big Five game, the three other schools would root for that Big Five team. And we really did share this building.
It's often been written that no other city able to do that. Had that camaraderie of five major colleges in the city, all united to play together and to root for each other.
Colleges all around the country looked at this with great interest as an example of what can be done. Every team respected the others, the players respected their opponents, coaches respect opposing coaches. It was a very unique kind of thing, and it happened nowhere else in the United States.
I think college basketball in the 60s in this city was a time of great pride. People, yes, they had their affiliations, but there was also this attachment to it was ours and it was special. all of the schools coming to one building to play, the Palestra. It certainly was unique to Philadelphia, like the soft pretzel or the mummers or anything else that people want to associate with Philadelphia. It was ours.
It wasn't just one game or two games. It was the only event as far as we were concerned. And I can remember whenever there was a high school game or college game, man, we didn't have any money, so we'd find ourselves jumping on the back of a trolley, pulling that electric trolley, pulling that string down. And while the guy would get out, we'd run around the other side and get on the trolley and get to the Palestra.
In those days too, you didn't have a lot of other distractions going on. There was no computers and no cable TV, so really going down to the Palestra live to watch games, and so many great college basketball players that you read about but you never saw on ESPN, for example, but you heard about them. And so the opportunity to go down to the Palestra and watch them play was as good as it got in those days, and that's what you live for.
It was so easy to fall in love with because there was such an intimacy when you walked in the building, because you felt like you were part of everything that was going on. It didn't really matter where you sat because you always felt like you were really close to the games.
I never walked out into the Palestra without some feeling of awe. I always felt that you were going to see something different every time you went into the Palestra, and usually you did, because the games were always so, especially Big Five games, were always so closely contested. And there was always some thrilling individual performance that came out of it.
What it was pure entertainment. I mean, it really was. There were a lot of people that didn't understand that there were 5 schools in Philadelphia. But if you were a sports fan, this was Mecca. This is where it all happened.
Being at the Palestra became an event. It was the place to be. If you wanted to see college basketball, you came to the Palestra to see it.
I realized that as a freshman that the big deal on a Saturday night was the doubleheader with 4 of the Big Five teams. And that became the date night. Guys who were very uncomfortable asking or requesting a date somehow managed to get a young lady to go, because she, in fact, was as enthralled as the guys were.
I could see where the woman might not have been excited about the event of sport, but would be excited about the date. And as probably would happen, the atmosphere in the Palestra was so warm and so genuine that after being in that environment and really not going in and thinking I'm going to enjoy the sport, you would come out like, boy, that was great. Can we do this again?
You surrounded your whole evening on a Saturday night with us, and I can't tell you the number of people who have told me that their first date with their future wife was taking her to the Palestra and watching a college basketball game. So again, even more so in those days, the tickets were cheap. Nobody had any money. The money you did spend, you spent on getting to the Palestra, grabbing a hot dog and a Coke, getting those tickets, and it was a great night out.
Over its 80-year history, the Palestra has hosted more college basketball fans and more college basketball games than any arena in the country. And from the mid-50s to the early 80s, Palestra basketball was at its best. 5 major Division I colleges and universities, each featuring some of the nation's finest players and most successful teams, all united to play together under the same roof. Hoops fans of the 1950s flocked to the Palestra bleachers to catch a glimpse of players such as Temple's All-American Bill Pickles Kennedy, LaSalle's Alonzo Lewis, the University of Pennsylvania's Joe Sturgis, and one of the greatest backcourt combinations in the history of college basketball, Temple's Hal Lear and Guy Rogers. During the following decade, Palestra spectators were enamored by hometown heroes like Matt Gukas and teammate Cliff Anderson, the St. Joseph's duo that made the Hawks nearly unbeatable in the 1960s. Longtime St. Joe's rival Villanova rallied behind another pair of memorable Philadelphia products, Hubie White and Wally Jones. In the early 1970s, Penn's sharpshooting Dave Wohl, backcourt teammate Steve Bilski, and high-flying forward Corky Calhoun led the Quakers to an unprecedented perfect season. LaSalle's Larry Cannon showed many flashes of brilliance on his way to a Big Five Hall of Fame career. And to close out the decade, the Explorers' Michael Brooks brought home the title of National College Player of the Year. Of all the great players that showcased their talents on the Palestra hardwood, there was one matchup that captured the hearts and minds of every college basketball fan in the city.
Howard Porter was at Villanova, and Ken Durrett was at LaSalle. Those were the two best players in the Big Five. As good as it came. It was like Wilt against Russell every time they played.
Williams hits Taylor, blocked by Porter, retrieved by Durrett. Durrett blocked by Porter again. Jones with a rebound.
Oh, boy, that is...
Charlie, I haven't seen college basketball like this ever.
Every one of those games was important, and every one of those games was close. And every one of those games was here, which is the main thing. That combination was awesome.
I think the intercity rivalries were big in getting everybody involved. Then to go along with that, each of the five schools played opponents there other than in Big Five games. So Temple played Kentucky, St. Joe's played Providence, LaSalle would play big games against DePaul and Western Kentucky, and those games were played at the Palestra. So it became not only a site for local competition and interest, but national competition as well.
Part of the history and lore of the Palestra is the great ones have played there. No matter where they were from, pretty much they touched the floor there.
Another was Niagara's Calvin Murphy. Cincinnati's Oscar Robertson battled in the Palestra. So did Rick Barry of Miami. West Virginia's Jerry West. And Wilt Chamberlain of Kansas.
The memory that I have of the Palestra of Wilt Chamberlain, the greatest basketball player of them all, playing on the Palestra floor. Is there a player greater than Wilt Chamberlain that's played on the Palestra floor? No. So all of that is a part of the memories, the mystique of the building.
One of the greatest players I played against while at the Palestra, my first year as a sophomore in 1970, we had the challenge of playing Julius Erving and the University of Massachusetts. My job was to try to slow him down the best I could, but he was a great scorer, a great rebounder. You know, I don't even know if I held him below his average or anything, but he still scored a lot.
I still remember Bill Bradley coming in this building in 1965, and the fans were so enthralled with him. He would stand outside and start shooting, and they'd start counting. 1, 2, 3, 15, 16, 17. He'd never miss. They got to 26 at one point, and he would just stand outside and take jump shots. 26 in a row at one point. I mean, it was unbelievable, and the fans were, and these are Penn people too, but they realized that there was something great, and there's no love lost between Penn and Princeton, but Bradley kind of transcended time. He may have been the greatest player I ever saw play here.
And I thought it was very exciting to play in a building that had so much basketball tradition in a town that loved the college game so much, before an audience that knew the game as well as a lot of the audiences that I played before in the Palestra did know the game.
It's the mecca of college basketball. I know other places in the country want to argue with me, but college basketball and basketball was founded in Philadelphia, and the Palestra is where you play it.
It's difficult to tell anybody what it's like unless they've been here. They'd say, no, it can't be. But it is, and it was.
it was a stark feel when you walked in. But as soon as you walked in, there was a feeling of this is a happening. I mean, the scurrying around and checking tickets and getting your pretzel and going down the ramp if you were down on the floor.
And man, you get the pretzel, mustard, and peanuts, come inside and you'd smell the popcorn and the hot dogs. All over that place you could get a good smell of the food, but it just had an atmosphere of an athletic event that was taking place that was supposed to be something very special.
There's nothing fancy about the place. There are no super boxes, none of that. It seats a few places, but for the most part, everybody sits cheek to jowl, if you know what I mean. And these are benches. These are what you see in a high school stadium or a high school gymnasium.
They're not the most comfortable places to sit. Even on press row, you're sitting on a bleacher seat. You know, there are occasions when, just out of habit, I'll lean back during a game and realize that I've got nothing to lean back on. I'll end up in somebody's knees.
The Palestra is such an intimate atmosphere. It's one of the few places in America where you can feel the energy when you come to a game, and you can feel the electricity seeping into you while you watch players run the floor because you are so close to the action. No one feels divorced from the action here. Even in the worst seat, it's better than the best seat in a lot of places.
The coaches and the players are right there. You can almost feel like you can reach out and touch them. You feel like you can holler instructions for what play you'd like to see run, and somebody would listen to you.
Just how the Palestra was set up. Fans close to the court, players' benches right along the side court, then a press row, a television booth up at the far reaches of the building. When you walked in there, you just had a feeling that you were looking at something special.
Though the capacity sign in the southwest corner of the Palestra read 9,200, many sellout crowds pushed attendance well beyond the building's legal limits. Spectators have called the experience nothing short of electrifying. As for the players and coaches, they could feel the exhilaration down on the court, just as the faithful did in the stands.
What you remember most is not only your game, but many of the games then were part of a doubleheader. So you would come in at the first game and participate in, as the evening went on, more and more people would come in and the sound would pick up. And if you played the second half of the doubleheader, what you remember most vividly was being in the locker room, and probably with about 10 minutes left to go before your game started, you could hear the stands and the fans cheering and screaming. And if it was a Big Five game, you heard fans cheering for one school, and then 2 seconds later you would hear them cheering for another school. And you know, getting ready to play a game, there was probably nothing that was more motivating than hearing the sounds in the locker room.
You want to win tonight? Do one thing. One thing. Just one thing. When you shoot the ball, go get it. Hey, let's go. Gang rebound. Gang rebound. Let's go.
When I was a player, I can just remember coming out of the locker room, if you played the second game especially, it was a city series game, coming out of the locker room, just so loud and so filled with great experiences, just that crowd noise, and it seemed like they were, everybody in the stands, all 9208 were sitting on either side of your ears and just screaming and yelling. That's how loud it was.
We enjoyed the noise. We always enjoyed the atmosphere playing down there. Every time we ran out on the court, you know, you could feel the goosebumps, because you know that, you know, this was the stage we wanted to be on.
We all will cherish that feeling. In fact, you know, the anticipation of being out there when you first go out the locker room door and the burst of energy that you feel, you know, just running around, getting into the layup line. You know, people are on their feet, it seems like the whole time during the layups.
A lot of times players couldn't hear you. During games, they couldn't hear you at all. I mean, you had to be very close. Timeouts, we would bring the players in very close. Sometimes we would sit on the bench itself, and I'd sit in front of them or kneel down in front of them and talk.
But get the shot that we want to get. We want a little bit more control of the ball.
but you almost had to talk to each player individually because the band from one school or the other was always playing. The cheerleaders were always going. There was noise in the stands, so it really didn't matter. And during the game itself, there was so much noise that the players couldn't hear you if you were trying to give them direction. So we had a lot of hand signals. Let's put it that way.
The first game I'll never forget in the Palestra.
We played Temple, and Harry Litwack was there, and we were ranked like third in the country, and Rolly Massimino was my assistant.
I had taken a somewhat major cut from my dear friend Coach Daly to go from Stony Brook to Penn.
And he'd been complaining about his salary constantly, about how much money he gave up and how much he wasn't making.
What happened was the Palestra was absolutely packed, and we walked from one little locker room to our bench, and as the people were screaming, yelling prior to the game,
I mean, you could have cut it with a knife.
Chuck said to me, "Rolly, isn't this worth $5,000?
And I said, "Is it worth it?" And he shook his head, yes. And by the way, he was overpaid.
And there's other things that go along with not only the crowds and the noise and the reverberation in this building. There were what they called rollouts, banners throughout the game.
The banners were terrific.
Some are pretty clever.
They got very up close and personal.
I don't think they were in bad taste. There were a lot of in very, very good taste and a lot that were quite comical, as a matter of fact.
The banners were getting kind of out of line, and we set up a system where each school, the athletic department, had to approve the banner before it could be used. And of course, that used to that would become a fiasco at times because students would always sneak banners in. It was the whole routine. The banners were fantastic.
Yeah, most of the other traditions had to do with the personalities of the people that, again, wouldn't necessarily be household names, but people that you would see in the Palestra all the time.
There was a guy named Yo-Yo.
He was just part of the scene.
You know, people would let him in. I'm sure he didn't buy a ticket.
He would come out and shoot foul shots between, like timeouts. They would yell for Yo-Yo to come out, and he would go underhand and shoot some foul shots and get the crowd going and wave his little hat around.
I don't think he really was employed. He was kind of like, you know, a hobo kind of guy.
Yeah, the Palestra was his home. He probably didn't have an address. It was right here at 33rd Street.
Most people don't really understand the real tradition of the Palestra because they've banned it. And what we did in the old days at the Palestra. They used to throw the streamers.
The streamers were part of the tradition. First basket of the game, the team that scores, their fans would let go with the streamers, and then you'd stop the game and pick up the streamers and go on from them. It almost feels like New Year's Eve, in a way, at the start of a basketball game.
You just feel awe in the presence of those ribbons going up in the air. The first team that would score a basket, you'd see all of these ribbons going up in the air, and that was pretty exciting. Then they'd have to stop and go out and sweep off the court for about 4 or 5 minutes. So while you were at an emotional high, you'd begin to go to an emotional low if you weren't the first guy to score a basket.
The interesting thing is sometimes the first basket could take place in 20 seconds, and sometimes just knowing the way basketball is played, it could take 3 or 4 minutes.
These Penn fans are waiting to explode with a Quaker field goal.
So when you're playing and you're concentrating on producing and scoring, and the first couple times you'd score a basket and all of a sudden you would look up and this avalanche of streamers would be pouring down.
Leapson turns around left baseline, his short jumper shot.
I think everybody was excited by those things coming out of the stands, and it was meaningful to score that first basket for your team. And mostly because of the streamers. You knew the streamers were flying out of there. So it was meaningful to do that.
It was like a fireworks display on 4th of July. It was a great sight and part of the atmosphere that made the Palestra such a special place.
I coached at Duke, and I know a lot about the crazies, but until you actually experience what goes on at the Palestra and the intensity of their rivals. And you know, all of these people sitting on bleacher seats and the same people going to the games for hundreds of years. It is the unique experience in basketball.
Be sure to watch the next Big Five doubleheader live from the Palestra. That's Wednesday night at 7. Temple against Penn State. Villanova plays Canisius in color. Right here on Sports 17. Timeout.
Television was very important, and the radio broadcast as well, but more television. Extremely important in the awareness of the Palestra as a site of these college games. It was local television to begin with, but it got a huge following. Les Kiter was huge in getting this thing started. He had his own vernacular, the ring-tailed howitzer, which was a long shot taken, and balls that dipped in and out of the rim, in again, out again, Finnegan. He had an expression for that.
I do think Les Kiter, during my era, at home, people started to get a kick out of this thing and see and watch it through the late 50s and early 60s. And Les, with his catchphrases and things of that nature, brought us or teams closer to the public in that area.
When I first came, Channel 6, they used to do a City Series game a month. And our contract was up with them, and John Ross and I were responsible for talking, negotiating, so we decided we were going to open up to see just if anybody else was interested. And the next thing you know is Channel 17 came in with a pitch that they wanted to do all the games.
Channel 17 was a brand new UHF channel. Prior to that, there were no UHF channels. There were only 3 channels plus PBS in this town. So consequently, it needed programming, and it was going to be a sports station. Anything that moved, we telecast. So the most logical thing were Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday doubleheaders at the Palestra. Big Five basketball. We had no idea how successful it would be.
And the handshake at center court. Howard Porter and Ken Durrett. Steve Honto with the ball. We're ready for the big one. Here's Al. Thank you, Charlie. Well, stand by, America. In control, LaSalle. Lodarczyk, Roland Taylor.
I think what happened is people realized that television was not going to keep fans out of the arenas. And that was always a big concern. You put the game on television, why would you go to a game if it's on television? And I think we showed that that was not a concern, and that it was going to have a positive effect on your program, and that more people were going to know about it and be interested in it.
Pennsylvania and Villanova. In the game people have waited to see ever since the Palestra schedule was published this year.
The television couldn't help it grow and make it bigger. There's no doubt about it. And the games were so good, and the place was so good, and it took on an aura or its own.
Calhoun gets position on Smith, and Smith makes the play. Calhoun gets it back, fires over his head. An amazing shot! An amazing shot by Calhoun!
Al Meltzer and Channel 17, the actual viewing and TVing the game is what started so much of what came after.
Gannon, Taylor. Rebound, Porter. Oh, he's got 12 rebounds.
The Big East, Dave Gavitt would come in there with his Providence clubs and see what was going on. And then when he became commissioner of the Big East, they followed the pattern of what had been established by the Palestra.
We were ESPN before there was an ESPN, and didn't know it. Had no idea. There were no satellites at the time. What Ted Turner did down in Atlanta was take a UHF station, which this company sold to him, put it up on a satellite, and became TNT, CNN, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And a couple of guys up in Connecticut started an all-sports station on cable, and that worked too. but we were there first. It's just that we didn't know it.
As the years went on, college basketball's presence on television increased dramatically, and as its popularity swept across the nation, the game was catapulted into a new, highly commercial era. This era would change the face of college basketball forever, ultimately diminishing the majestic influence the Palestra once had over the game it helped birth.
I don't think anything had changed from whenever, say the 50s, about the product. I think what happened was the marketing of the product is what changed. The awareness of the public as to how good this was. Judging by the crowds at the Palestra, they were aware how good the product was. But in '79, a national audience, two great names, that was going on for 40 years, and it was captured, and people got hooked.
We were there courtside to do the consolation game when Penn played DePaul and lost in overtime. And then we stayed right there and sat mid-court to watch the battle between Larry Bird and the Sycamores of Indiana State and the Michigan State Spartans led by Magic Johnson. Michigan State won the national championship. And at the time, that was the most watched national championship in history, highest television ratings.
I think there's no question that 1979 was the stepping stone, the impetus for college basketball to take off and really zoom out of space as far as money was concerned, as far as the NCAA tournament was concerned.
And then as the ensuing years went on, people started to watch more because ESPN was starting.
ESPN saw college basketball as a place where it could go to get viewers, because there were so many games available that weren't being televised. They couldn't get the NFL, they couldn't get the big college football games, they couldn't get Major League Baseball. They could get regular season college basketball.
It used to be, well, you know what, I couldn't wait for Saturday afternoon because there might be a game on. Well, now you could go night after night after night, never move, and see every game. The whole world changed. So to think in any way that Philadelphia would be isolated from that change would be a little bit immature thinking.
Sadly, in '85, the Palestra, as I knew it, came to a halt. It came to a crushing halt. I mean, schools wanted to go their own way. Villanova was in the process of building their own on-campus arena. Temple had plans in the works to play their games on campus.
Villanova and Temple approached me and approached the other athletic directors and presidents and indicated that they no longer wanted to play all of the City Series games in the Palestra. Well, this was like, wow, how could they not want to do this? We tried to talk them out of it, but they were dead set. Well, they both felt that their school's interest would be served by playing their home City Series games at their campus sites.
And finally, the game has arrived. Welcome to McGonigal Hall, everybody.
By 1985, Villanova had become a national power. They had just won the national championship. They felt they wanted to flex their muscles. They felt they wanted to become more of a national school, and they felt that they wanted to make a little bit more money to support the program in order to maintain their competitiveness with some of the elite programs in the country. And they decided to pull out. Temple, I think, was on the exact same track, although you may not hear that as publicly. And the other three schools are kind of left to their own devices. I mean, for a while, St. Joe's and LaSalle played here with Penn, and then LaSalle signed a contract to move over to Convention Hall. And the thing kind of fragmented, and to me, it was never really the same after '85.
And it was more than just basketball game, just two teams, because, it was more like a meeting place for basketball people. It was like a meeting place for Philadelphia basketball. And like all the great names, all the great people, I saw there as kids. And, Philadelphia basketball has a rich tradition. And, as far as players, coaches, and everybody. And anytime it was a game at the Palestra, you seen those same people there. And, when I decided to go to LaSalle and then realized that, it wasn't going to be there, I was really disappointed about that. And At the time, I didn't really understand why. So when we played at, DuPont, and we played at, Hawk Hill, and played different games at different places, the rivalry still meant the same, but it wasn't the same because the game should have been played at the Palestra.
I always remember thinking that I don't know if anybody had a right to do that. And I'm not blaming anybody, but to me, it would be like taking the cheesesteak and saying, well, no, we're not going to make it that way anymore. But we're still going to call it the cheesesteak. So you don't have the right to traditions. Those are to be kept and to be fostered and to be furthered, not to be altered to somebody's specifications. So I think there's a whole group of students who have gone through all the schools that don't really believe that there were these rivalries and that they were special or that they were different than Big Monday or a Saturday game, and they were. And I don't think that I think there are players that have gone through and didn't really get the essence of the brotherhood. I felt sorry for a lot of the people that I knew were going to miss out on something that was extraordinary and something that only happened in Philadelphia.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the University of Pennsylvania Palestra. College basketball's most historic gym.
As with most things that change over time, athletics has changed. College athletics has gotten much bigger. It's the money is greater. It's probably more of an entertainment vehicle than just a sporting event. But the one thing I can say with certainty is the experience in the Palestra hasn't changed at all. And that's one of the things that I think sets the Palestra apart. The integrity of the building hasn't changed very much. And so it's one of the few places where you can say, as much as things have changed around us, they really haven't changed very much in this building.
The reality is that when you come into the Palestra and you walk out on the floor and you see the steel girdered ceiling, you see the stands going up, you see the temporary bleachers, it exudes a certain tradition. And there are a lot of great players who've come through there. And I look at that and I say, that's really one of the things to remember about the game.
Some people say the Palestra is not what it used to be. And that might be true, but it is still a very special place. And if you experience a doubleheader, even now, in the 21st century, or a great game in the Palestra, I will challenge that person to think about that game and ask them, in a year or two, if they remember that. And most people remember some of these events that occur. A Princeton-Penn game, an overtime doubleheader, the Big Five Classic. They'll remember some of these events for the rest of their life. Think about that. Those kind of impressions are really hard to make on a person's psyche. Sports in Philadelphia and basketball and in the Palestra, that mix somehow has made this happen.
When I come down here, I still see a lot of the same people I saw the first time I ever showed up. And these are people that it's their lives too, and this is an important part of their lives. It's a Philadelphia treasure, and because of that, I think a lot of people who keep coming back over and over and over again just because they want to be part of the building as much as they want to be part of the games.
What I do know is that when you enter that building, then you should expect the unexpected, because every game down there has had a flavor that's a little bit different, has had an occurrence that's a little bit different. I think it's really the ghost of basketball is in that building, and there's a spirit there, there's a sense, a karma that's just different, and that sprinkles itself into each and every game.
When you do walk into the place, there is this sense that you've sort of stepped into a time capsule, and all those buildings with corporate names are kind of out of your realm, at least for one night. There's nothing gaudy about the Palestra. It is what it is. And it's even though it's been renovated and remodeled and spruced up and painted, you still feel like it's the same place it was when it first opened. It just has that feel of being an old-time basketball game when the game was simpler and played just as well, but without all of the outside distractions that are part of it now.
This building is a cathedral for college basketball, and I think the reason is because it is a powerful religious experience. I think that I think there's a lot of people who are emotionally moved by being in this building.
one of the rare places in our world, and certainly one of the rare places here in college basketball. It is a cathedral.